Chapter 22. Hermione was a holy terror. Jonathan thought that she was terrifying when he thought she was thoroughly normal, if a bit prone to certain odd behaviors. Now that Jonathan knew that Hermione was magical, she had taken it as a personal mission to completely derail his composure. Was it his fault that Hermione was being uncharacteristically adorable with Ardith, and Jonathan therefore couldn't hold back the occasional mocking comment? Of course not. Was it his fault that Jonathan was thoroughly jealous, that in contrast to Hermione and Jonathan's borderline flirting when joking about their impending marriage, Hermione was achingly sweet to Ardith in a way that made Jonathan all too aware that he would never have someone like her? So in response, Jonathan made sarcastic jokes to hide his depression, and boy, could Hermione retaliate. She was sitting next to Ardith showing him a photo album from when she was younger, the subtle leaning into him, Ardith clearly taking in the sweet scent of her hair. The light grasp of Ardith's hand on Hermione's, utterly sickening. Jonathan wasn't jealous at all. Ah, lovebirds in their natural habitat. Tell me, of your particular species, what is the usual mating ritual? And can Ardith old boy look forward to another 11 years before completing the mating ritual? I'm fairly certain my mating rituals are none of your business, Jonathan. Hermione raised an eyebrow in irritation. Jonathan laughed, but left well enough alone. However, Hermione had seemed to take offense to him delving into the sensitive topic of her avoiding Ardith for a literal decade. Nice hair, Jonathan, Rick said with a menacing grin. It had been a few hours since Jonathan's little comment, so he was thoroughly taken aback. Hair. Evie found her compact mirror and handed it over to him with an ill-concealed snicker. Jonathan choked. His hair was green. He spluttered until he saw a smirking Hermione next to a grinning Ardith. You, Jonathan pointed at Hermione angrily. You give me back my Lucius Brown locks this instant. But Jonathan, it's my friendship ritual. I'm afraid you're stuck with it for the next 11 years. And whatever Hermione did to his hair stuck until he broke down and got on his knees to beg for forgiveness late the next day. Jonathan could admit that he was a little bit bitter being the odd man out. Izzy was perfectly happy to be alone, and Jonathan usually attached himself to his nephew to companionably commiserate the gross affection constantly displayed by Evelyn and Rick. Hermione and Ardith were not gross by any means, but the lingering touches and all that were making Jonathan cantankerous, and the lack of alcohol was doing him no favors. Goodness, he missed that scamp. They needed to get the lad back ASAP. Are you in love with Hermione, Jonathan? Jonathan coughed and spit into his tea at the completely unexpected question from his beloved sister. No, why on earth would you think such a thing? Jonathan turned a bright red at her answer. Because every time Hermione is being even mildly affectionate with Ardith, you try to ruin it. And I am honestly worried you are going to get seriously injured by Hermione at this rate. Hermione had hit him with a spell that caused Jonathan to throw up slugs for an hour after Jonathan made yet another distasteful and crude innuendo concerning her and Ardith. They had been on the blimp for 4 days, and Jonathan's comments were getting out of hand. If you are not in love with her, then you are clearly lacking in any self-preservational instinct. I say, Jonathan burst out playfully, I have never been thus insulted in my life. I am not you dear little sister. Evelyn was not deterred in the slightest and continued to stare at Jonathan without blinking. I am, Jonathan sighed. I am merely sad that I will never have anyone, Evie. Evelyn sat next to Jonathan and gave his hand a sympathetic squeeze. I suppose that I fancied Hermione might be available forever, and if by some miracle I won over her demon cat, we might find companionship together. It wasn't love, but it was comforting. Now, I am the odd man out until we get Alex back. And then, what will I do when he grows up? I'll just be the same miserable, lonely drunk I've always been. Evelyn pulled Jonathan's head to lean on her shoulder and put her arm around him. Oh, Jonathan, I'm sure you will find someone. Just Evelyn couldn't help the roll of her eyes. Maybe stop looking at the Casper or the brothels. No. I won't find someone, Evie, Jonathan sighed, before sitting up and kissing Evie on the side of the head. But I promise to rein my mockery in until we get Alex back and continue to be the carefree and comical brother who drives you alone, Batty, provided that Hermione doesn't kill me for being such a bitter twat. Hermione continued to amaze and terrify Ardith in ways that he never thought possible. Ardith could not fathom what had come over Jonathan since Hermione had agreed to marry him, but Jonathan had been testing her patience. Watching Jonathan puke up nasty and slimy slugs, Ardith would never under any circumstances anger her enough for Hermione to take similar measures against himself. Hermione was brooding in her tent angrily after the entire incident. "How long is he going to be doing that?" Ardith asked, with a queasy turn of the stomach at just the memory of the nasty bugs. "An hour," Hermione said shortly. She wasn't proud of herself. Hermione had lost her temper. Jonathan was being absolutely insufferable, and God alone would be able to help him if he didn't stop talking about Ardith and Hermione's non-existent sexual relationship. Ardith sat next to Hermione on the couch in her tent and took her hand. "If it makes you feel better, Jonathan did have it coming," Ardith said with a small smile. "It doesn't," Hermione sighed while leaning into Ardith's side. "You know, Ronald accidentally did the same spell to himself." "How?" Ardith said with confusion. "His wand was broken in a flying car incident," Hermione said simply, while Ardith stared at her like she had two heads. "Jonathan is right. You just love to throw your crazy stories out in the open without warning," Ardith said in wonder. "It keeps me entertained," Hermione smirked. "Besides, there are just so many to choose from. If I told every story chronologically, explaining every little detail along the way, we would be sitting here for a very long time. Far better to use them for comedic effect. Otherwise, the process would be quite tedious." Hermione looked at Ardith's tattoos curiously. "What do they mean?" Ardith felt his breathing deepen as Hermione traced his tattoos with her finger. "My tribe and my calling to protect the world from Imhotep," Ardith breathed out. Hermione hummed. "Maybe," Hermione continued with a grin, "I should get your name tattooed on my right buttock." Ardith's eyes flew open and began to laugh loudly. "Why on your right buttock in particular?" Ardith managed to get out despite his mirth. "I'm told it is simply the place where such things go," Hermione shrugged. "Would you prefer I put it on my forehead?" Ardith considered her. "No, but on your cheeks like mine." Ardith swiped his thumb along her jaw. "Or maybe here, so everyone can see you are mine." "Your right buttock would be too secret," Hermione swallowed. She had been joking. However, Ardith was perfectly serious. "I'll think about it," Hermione coughed. Putting a man's name on her face, even in Arabic, it was nothing she would have ever done before. However, Hermione was asking Ardith to bind his soul to hers. "Maybe you don't have to," Ardith soothed. "It was just a thought." But he wanted it. Hermione could see it in his eyes. "I'll think about it," Hermione said again before they drifted into a companionable silence. Jonathan had made amends with Hermione, as best he could at least, and Hermione refrained from hexing him for the rest of the trip to the pyramid. The tension and quiet grew the closer they got. They could not be far behind Imhotep's men, and everyone was suitably on edge. They floated down the Blue Nile with towering cliffs on each side. Ardith could see that Hermione was very uneasy, more so than everyone else. "Everything is going to be okay." Ardith placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Something is wrong," Hermione said, far from being soothed. "Something bad is going to happen." And like the evil twit that he was, Imhotep's face appeared in a wall of water. "Merlin's saggy balls. Step on it, Izzy. Starboard, starboard," Rick yelled. "Hold on." They all held on as they careened desperately after Horace between the cliffs, narrowly avoiding the rock walls. They all breathed a sigh of relief when they made it out without splatting against the wall, and it seemed they had lost Imhotep's spell. Sheer. "Great," Rick said sarcastically as he looked through the spyglass. "He's back," Izzy yelled. "No, really," Hermione yelled. She spelled her tent into her bag and braced herself. "Hang on," Rick yelled as the wall of water appeared yet again. Hermione threw up a protection spell as they were swallowed by the giant wall of water. She let go when the pressure grew too great, but thankfully it took the brunt of the water's force and the boat wasn't broken to pieces. Hermione wobbled back on her feet. They were scattered along the ground, but thankfully, everyone seemed to be all right. Rick immediately began retrieving his guns and all his supplies. "All right, Izzy, while we get my boy, we need you to get this blimp up and running again," Rick ordered confidently. "Even if I could, what am I supposed to fill it with?" Izzy screamed shrilly. "It's filled with gas." "Where am I going to find gas in the middle of the jungle?" "Natural resources," Hermione supplied helpfully. Ardith caught Horace as he flew towards him and began preparing his message. "And," Izzy continued, paying her not the slightest mind, "even if I could finagle this to take hot air, I would need a massive amount. How am I supposed to do that?" "Well, if anyone is full of hot air, it's you, pal," Rick grinned before beginning to head the group back into the jungle. But they all stopped at the shrill shriek of a bird as a gunshot rang through the trees. "Horace! Horace!" Ardith was yelling frantically. Hermione silently said a prayer that what happened wasn't that, but there was no response from his beloved bird. "I have to go," Ardith began frantically. "No," Rick stopped Ardith as he attempted to walk off. "You have to help me find my son." Ardith looked regretfully at O'Connell. "Someone has to direct the Medjai to face the army of Anubis." "You promised you would help me find my son," O'Connell said desperately. "I can take you," Hermione interrupted. Rick turned to her in surprise. "Once we find Alex, I will take you by magical means. It will be a lot faster than you going on foot. It would be even faster if I had been where we are going, but I'm still able to get you at least as fast as a horse could." Hermione looked at Ardith confidently. "Trust me," Ardith finally nodded. "All right. I will help you find your son, and then me and Hermione will go to the Medjai." Ardith nodded. They all began trooping off again, but Hermione interrupted again. "I'm going to help Izzy with the blimp real quick. I can at least repair the bulk of the damages magically. It will only take a couple of minutes. I'll apparate to Evie's safety charm. When I do so, don't shoot me." "You're sure you can find us?" Jonathan questioned skeptically. "I managed to land inside of a flying aircraft working off the same amount of information," Hermione deadpanned. "Right. Forgot about that," Jonathan laughed. Hermione walked up to Ardith. "I'll see you soon." Hermione kissed him on the cheek, and they walked off, leaving her with Izzy. Hermione began to repair the ship and material that held the hot air. "I can't do anything about the engine," Hermione said regretfully, as Izzy watched her gaping at the amount she had done in such a short time. She had fixed damages that were there before the wall of water crashed into them in mere minutes. "But at least this way you can focus on the engine and getting the hot air." "Thanks," Izzy choked breathlessly. Hermione paused. Maybe Horace wasn't dead, or she could get his body for Ardith to bury later. "Akio, Horace the hawk." Hermione waited with bated breath before catching the bird as it whizzed into her arms, and amazingly, it bit her savagely. "Hey!" Hermione sucked her bleeding finger before examining the bird gently. His wing was damaged. That was evidently where he had been shot. Horace probably would have been eaten by some predator if Hermione hadn't saved him, but he was alive. Hermione quickly patched him up the best she could and then fed him a small amount of dreamless sleep potion. "Izzy, I need you to hold onto Horace for me and keep him safe." "I am not holding onto the demon bird," Izzy said, looking at the bird eskins. It had pecked him more than once during their long trip, and he was not fond of it. Hermione placed the hawk down gently before grabbing Izzy roughly by the collar. "So help me, Izzy, you will ensure this bird lives, and if you don't, I will turn you into a ferret and feed you to a hawk as penance." Izzy stared at Hermione in terror. "You wouldn't," Izzy choked. "You're bluffing. You want to test me and find out," Hermione said icily. Izzy finally shook his head frantically no. Once Izzy had placed the bird carefully in a cupboard next to the steering wheel, Hermione gave him another warning look before she apparated. "I mean it, Izzy. Either you both live or you both die," and she was gone with a sharp crack. No wonder she is friends with O'Connell, Izzy muttered, and began to work on the engine after sending the closed cupboard a glare. Chapter 23. Ardith hiked grimly through the jungle. He looked on the grotesque structures of human bodies with indifference. There was a reason that no one had made it to Arm Sheer successfully. There had to be some sort of guardian. Ardith gulped back the emotions for his lost friend. He loved Horace. It was like a part of his soul was gone. I say, I wonder how they do that. Ardith raised a brow as Jonathan pointed at the shrunken heads grotesquely adorning the trees. Jonathan smiled apologetically as the lot of him looked at him like he was crazy. I was just curious. They make an incision in the back of the head. Jonathan shrieked in a girly fashion as Hermione appeared from behind a nearby tree. And then they peel it off the skull and discard the cartilage, fat and bones, then sew it back together and let it mummify. Jonathan looked like he wanted to hurl. Add being turned to a shrunken head to the list of undesirable burial arrangements, Jonathan said a bit queasy. I don't know what is more alarming, Rick said with amusement. The fact that you appeared out of nowhere or the fact that you know that. I'm a witch that reads. Sue me, Hermione snorted before giving Ardith a side hug. As soon as they get Alex, we will need to make our escape to get you to the Medjai army. Ardith only nodded as they continued to make their way to a good vantage point for Evelyn and Jonathan to pick off the men in red from a distance. You know, there is something important we need to talk about, Hermione said conversationally when they finally began to get set up. And what would that be? Ardith said with a concerned smile. Which one of us gets to kick Lackner's ass? Hermione said with a savage smile. That would be me, Ardith said with a short laugh. Lackner tried to kill my father. Lackner tried to kill me, Hermione argued playfully. Yes, but you are my beloved. That means Lackner tried to kill two people I care about, and that means the pleasure shall be mine. Ardith grinned in triumph, and Hermione held her hands up in defeat. All right, but if you can't handle it, I will be hexing his genitals off, penis and all. Jonathan winced while shielding his package at the thought. You are the perfect woman. Ardith gave her a kiss and smiled. Are you two going to keep up with the questionable flirting, or are we going to get down there and get to business? Rick asked gravely. Ardith nodded and secured the last of his supplies to his back. Do you know how to use that? Ardith pointed to Jonathan's gun as he secured his saber to his waist. Foxtrot champion 3 years running, Jonathan said proudly. Do you know how to use that? We shall see. Jonathan nearly jumped out of his skin as the saber stopped just short of his neck. They say the only way to kill a soldier of Anubis is to cut off his head. Ah, yes, Jonathan said nervously after inching away from the sharp blade. Men and their swords, Hermione snorted. Pun intended. Evelyn let out a short laugh. Ardith gave a quizzical look at Jonathan, and Jonathan merely pointed at their prospective genitals, which caused Ardith to shake his head with a roll of his eyes before sheathing his sword. See you on the other side. Hermione smiled encouragingly to Evelyn. See you, Evelyn smiled tightly, and they were off. The eerie calm enveloped them with the tension of anticipation. They walked carefully and quietly and made minimal progress before they heard screaming in the distance. Rick took off with the two of them following close behind. Hermione sent a stunning spell at a flying object coming right for her. Ardith startled at the sudden red light, but ran with Hermione as she kept on going with whatever had attacked immobilized behind her. They entered the group of red-cloaked men amidst chaos and screaming. The men were being yanked under the long grass by an unseen enemy. Rick and Ardith shot manically at the men, while Hermione continued to focus on shielding them from tiny darts and shots flying all around them. Thankfully, the men that she missed fell to Evie and Jonathan's own shots. They quickly changed their strategy as Rick began to follow yelling that was clearly coming from Alex. There wasn't time to worry about the unseen creatures as Rick ran straight for a panicked Alex being advanced on by the murderous Lackner. Hermione breathed a sigh of relief as Rick snatched him up just in time and focused on shooting at anyone who approached Ardith and staying clear of the grass. so she could see what approached her feet. It was tough going to keep up with them as Ardith and Lackner went further and further into the jungle. Hermione screamed in alarm as the ugliest, most horrific demon, Mummy Monkey, screeched in her face while perched in a nearby tree. Hermione sent a bombarder in its direction and stumbled back as it was blown to smithereens. Hermione struggled to her feet, but stopped in her tracks as Ardith killed Lackner, only to have a gun to the back of his head. Hermione nearly cried in relief when the red-robed bastard fell dead due to a gunshot to the head. Seeing Rick and Alex nowhere in sight, Hermione pulled her broom from her purse and ran to Ardith. Ardith ran to her also, but stopped short at seeing the broom in her hand. "What is that for?" Ardith said with bewildered amusement. "Just get on," Hermione said with a tired roll of her eyes as she straddled the handle. "You are joking," Ardith said with disbelief. Hermione blasted a demon monkey as it started swinging towards her and immediately lost all her patience. "Just get on the bloody broom, Ardith." "Do I look like I have time for jokes?" Ardith unsurely got on the back of the broom and hurriedly grabbed Hermione's waist as she surged into the air, blasting mummy monkeys left and right. Hermione struggled to gain altitude, but pressed higher and higher while Ardith punched the occasional monkey that swung too close for comfort. When they finally flew clear of the tree line, Hermione began to fly in the direction that Horace had originally gone. "Where are we going?" Hermione yelled over the wind. "Keep going this way," Ardith yelled back. Hermione nodded back, and they continued on. The 12 chieftains were growing nervous. Horace should be here by now, hours ago in fact, but the sun was rising, and there was no sign of him. "What is that?" One of the younger men was pointing to a rapidly growing black dot directly below the sun. "Me, Miss Evans," Ali yelled in shock as the dot became a person crouched over a stick on the horizon. "And Chieftain Bay," the younger man yelled as Ardith's head also became clear over Hermione's shoulder. They all watched in shock as the couple was all too soon upon them and crashing into a heap as they made an abrupt stop. Hazib rushed forward and sighed in relief as they were clearly fine enough to immediately start bickering. "If this is a regular mode of transport for your people, why aren't you better at it?" Ardith rubbed his bruised elbow as he disentangled himself from her. "Excuse me, Mr. Medjai. It is one mode of transportation that has never been my favorite. And consider that you're offered to take all the others, and you can see that riding a broomstick is mediocre and thoroughly overrated," Hermione huffed angrily. "Though don't be surprised if I specifically do it badly so you can suffer that little comment." "Chieftain Bay," Ardith immediately struggled to his feet and bowed respectfully to the elder chieftain that addressed him. "Chieftain, we have the location of Arms Shear." Ardith was brought a horse, and several eyebrows rose when he immediately pulled Hermione onto the back of it. Hazib brought his horse to ride alongside Ardith's horse as he led the way to where the army was most likely to appear. "You seem awfully close to Miss Evans, Chief," Hazib said with a smirk. "Granger," Hermione corrected. "Really, my apologies. So, Miss Granger, is there a reason you are no longer actively avoiding Ardith as we all suspected?" Hazib grinned as Hermione blushed brightly. "We have come to an understanding," Ardith interrupted with a big grin, and Hermione blushed an even brighter shade of red. "I'll do my best to keep it quiet until you have a chance to talk to your father," Hazib said with a smirk. "But sharing a horse is a bit of a tell." Ardith grinned even bigger, and Hermione rolled her eyes with a smile. The merriment quickly died as they reached their destination. The air felt thick with promise. Hermione jumped off as Ardith headed the army and pulled out a broom yet again. "I thought you hated that mode of transport," Ardith snarked. "As much as I love it," Hermione said sarcastically, "it also happens to be the best for combat." "You are fighting with us," Ardith said in alarm. "We," Hermione pointed at Ardith and herself meaningfully, "are going to pretend you didn't say that for the time being." "Hermione," Ardith continued undelayed, "the warriors of Anubis are 6 feet tall and of another world. It is too dangerous." "Oh, darling," Hermione snorted indelicately. as AMI and 6 feet. What does it matter after facing 12-foot-tall trolls, or a 3-headed dog the size of a house? Hermione left Ardith gaping in shock as she didn't wait for his response as she kicked off into the air. Ardith was supremely lucky that he had brought this up on the eve of battle, but Hermione was not going to let it slide the minute they were safe and sound. He was going to have an unimaginably uncomfortable conversation very soon. "I think," Hazib said dryly, "that you are going to drink terrible coffee for a month if your intended has anything in common with your mother." Ardith watched Hermione stop in midair above them to await their enemies and shivered. Maybe voicing his thoughts in that moment was not the wisest thing he had ever done, but there was little time to consider his blunder as the army materialized on the horizon. Hermione watched as the truly bone-chilling Anubis warriors formed out of the sand. Hermione waited until they were close enough, but not so close that her spells would harm the Medjai. Ardith blinked in surprise as the Anubis warriors yelled in anger as they were blasted time and time again by spells that caused them to explode where they stood. He saw them begin to throw their weapons up at Hermione, only for her to fly higher and hit them more quickly. Unfortunately, the warriors still managed to make their way to the Medjai, and they were soon mixed in, and Hermione was forced to take on a less straightforward approach. Ardith was knocked off his horse far too soon, and just barely managed to keep his feet as the snarling dog man slammed its spear down on his sword. His arm shook with the effort to keep his weapon aloft, but the pressure suddenly eased as the Anubis warrior turned to sand as a bright spell slashed through his body. Hermione leveled to stand back to back with Ardith. He watched with admiration as she took down soldier after soldier with relative ease. For every soldier Ardith killed, Hermione had taken down 4 more. "You are falling behind Ardith, old boy," Hermione yelled breathlessly. Ardith laughed breathlessly as they finally felled the last soldier. His men cheered, but Ardith stilled with terror at the sound of distant rumbling. Hermione ran behind him as he sprinted to the next dune over. She lost her breath as Hermione saw an even bigger army than before. "Ardith," Hermione steeled herself, "I'm going to do something that is probably stupid. I need you all to step back." Ardith knew better than to argue after his initial blunder. "Get back!" The Medjai retreated a short distance, and Hermione waited patiently for the army of Anubis to come close enough for her to inflict maximum damage. "Fiendfire!" Ardith watched in awe and terror as a fiery giant lion, followed by a fire hawk, burst from Hermione's wand. The Medjai watched in awe and terror as the army of Anubis was swallowed with dying screams by the heat. Hermione could hardly see past the unbearable flames. She didn't bother to check if the army was defeated and immediately focused on reining her magic in. When Hermione finally had pulled all the fire back into her wand, she was left drained and relieved that there was no army and that she hadn't been swallowed by her own cursed fire. Ardith ran forward as Hermione fell to her knees. Her magical core was drained. She prayed that what she had done would be enough, but the Medjai watched with hopeless sadness as yet another army appeared on the horizon. They stepped forward to surround Ardith and the fallen Hermione and yelled bracingly with swords held high. Ardith stood over Hermione as the demon dogs were nearly upon them, and they were covered in a fine layer of black dust. Ardith looked around in disbelief and wariness until they were certain. The Medjai laughed with relief and hugged each other. "The O'Connells did it," Ardith yelled with relief before dropping onto the ground to pull Hermione close to him. She wasn't bleeding mortally. Ardith could see the occasional nasty cut left from the swipe of a blade, but she seemed mostly unharmed. "Hermione!" Ardith's head snapped up as a deafening roar sounded from Arm's sheer, and they watched in awe as the jungle was steadily swallowed. His focus snapped back to Hermione as she groaned. "I don't think I shall be doing that again." Hermione placed her wand in her pocket clumsily, and Ardith pulled her closer to him. "Are you all right?" Ardith said with concern. "Of course." Hermione waved her hand in a flopping motion. "That was just an incredibly draining spell to contain." The last time I saw it performed, the fire swallowed the stupid boy who started it. I'm glad it did not swallow you. Ardith stroked her face in concern. If it had, how would you make me regret doubting your effectiveness in battle? Thank you for reminding me of that. Hermione grinned tiredly. But you will understand if I get some sleep before I make you suffer. Of course, Hababai. Chieftain, Ardith looked up at Hazib. We are going to go track down the horses. Ardith merely nodded his approval and watched as the last of the jungle was swallowed, and a dirigible flew out of the last of it. Ardith laughed in relief, and Hermione grinned sleepily as she followed his gaze. He waved his arm widely and picked up Hermione carefully to her grumbling. I am fully capable of walking, Hermione grumbled. Really? Ardith said skeptically. You took care of an entire wave of the army all by yourself. Let me carry you, Hababai. Ardith gave no mind to Hermione's grumbling as the dirigible landed down near them. He handed her up to a concerned Rick. What's wrong, Hermione? Evelyn began with concern. Just magical fatigue, Hermione said with great irritation. Don't get yourself in a tizzy. You shall hear the valiant tale of Hermione's magical prowess over the fires of our village if you will follow me and my men, Ardith offered with a grin. Of course, Evelyn smiled tiredly. Take your blasted, flesh-tearing bird before you go, Izzy yelled. Ardith looked at him with puzzlement before climbing aboard the blimp and following him to the cupboard. Ardith could have cried when Horace gave a happy screech. Ardith cradled the injured bird in his arms. How? Ardith said with wonder. Your witch saved him, Izzy said with disgruntlement. Also threatened to turn me into a ferret and feed me to a hawk if I didn't care of it. Terrifying woman you got yourself there. Ardith turned to Hermione to give her his thanks, but found her passed out on the floor of the dirigible with her head in Evie's lap. Alex was laid down beside her with his head in Evie's lap also. I think she is magnificent, Ardith grinned before jumping down from the dirigible to claim his horse from Hazib. Horace gripped Ardith's shoulder as they rode to their camp. You are going to be lucky if Ali doesn't tell everyone before we get back, Hazib grinned. He rode ahead of us in quite a hurry. Ardith chuckled tiredly. He couldn't even be mad. He was just too damn happy. Chapter 24. Evie stroked Hermione's hair in order to soothe herself. Hermione was pale. Evelyn had been the one who died, and she did not look so sickly. What happened during the battle with the army of Anubis? Is Aunt Hermie gonna be okay? Evie smiled tiredly at Alex. Don't let her catch you calling her that, or Hermione will show you just how fine she is. Evelyn looked over to her brother with a twinkle in her eye. Jonathan pissed her off while you were gone, and he was puking slugs. How did she do that? Alex's brow was burrowed with confusion. She is a bloody terrifying witch. That's how, Izzy said dramatically, and Rick rolled his eyes. What our roguish captain is saying is that your aunt is magical, but nice, unlike Imhotep. And she is only terrifying if certain morons make ill-chosen comments about her bedroom life. Right, Jonathan. Rick turned to Jonathan with a grin. Jonathan nervously adjusted his wrinkled tie. Right. That actually makes some sense, Alex said thoughtfully. Sneaky Aunt Hermione. She wasn't kidding about the whirling top being magic. She was telling the truth. And her ability to pop up out of nowhere like a magician made perfect sense now. You will have to ask her if you can stay over at her house. Evelyn smiled with sudden excitement. It was amazing. So many wonderfully old books. I could have spent days there if we hadn't been so worried about you. Evie kissed the top of Alex's head, and he let her, rather than his usual habit of pushing his mother off of him when she got too goopy. Figures, old mum, that your first thought is the books and not my incident with the staircase, Jonathan said with his usual grandiose gestures. What happened with the staircase? Alex's inquiry was interrupted by Rick. We are nearing the village, Izzy. Prepare to land, Rick yelled out as the Medjai on the ground signaled to come down. Ardith was climbing the side of the dirigible before they had even hit the ground. Alex startled back at seeing the tall Arab man suddenly in front of him checking Hermione over. Is she really going to be okay? Evelyn said with concern. Has she slept this whole time? Ardith questioned without answering. Yes, Evie sighed with frustration. What happened out there? Hermione, Ardith sat back with a tired sigh. Took on the entire second wave of the army single-handed. How? Evie said with shock. She called it fiendfire, Ardith said thoughtfully. What the hell is that? Rick questioned. Giant, truly giant beasts of fire. It was the most terrifying thing I have ever seen, Ardith said quietly while gently swiping hair from Hermione's forehead. It was incredible. She was a sight to behold, Ardith said admiringly and lovingly. Anyways, Jonathan interrupted him awkwardly. Shouldn't we be getting her better sleeping accommodations? I can't imagine that witches like to sleep on hard floors more than the rest of humanity. Ardith nodded and picked Hermione up. Are you sure she will be all right? Evelyn stumbled to her feet on tingling legs and followed Ardith off the blimp with concern. Hermione assured us she was just tired, Ardith smiled. Me and my family will keep a close eye on her in the meantime, my friends. You are welcome to stay as long as you need. Ardith walked through the village to the murmuring and gossiping of everyone. Ali had certainly been busy. Hermione was already famous among his soldiers. Now she was a legend and a hero among the entire tribe. Any concerns Ardith may have had with her acceptance into his life were swiftly fading away. Adam and Basma had huge grins on their faces until Ardith drew close enough for them to see how sickly Hermione looked. Oh, my dear. Alumu rushed forward and felt Hermione's sweaty forehead. Hermione used too much magic, Ardith said with uncertainty. She told me she just needs rest. Well, bring her inside, Adam exclaimed. Ardith was ushered in to place Hermione on his bedroll and then promptly ushered out by Alumu. We are engaged, Mama, Ardith pleaded. Wonderful news, Basma said happily. But you are not married yet, and she promptly drew the curtain closed and blocked Hermione from their view. Ardith sighed with frustration before dropping next to his chuckling father. That is good news, my son. Adam clapped him on the back. But she is right. Your Alumu will see to it Miss Evans is taken care of. Lay back and get some rest. Ardith attempted to do just that, but couldn't stop worrying. Was she really going to be okay? And when Ardith began to calm somewhat and doze off against the sitting cushions. Ugh! Ardith immediately jumped up in alarm, and along with his startled father ran behind the curtain. Alumu stood in shock with a bleeding finger and stared down at a partially undressed Hermione. What happened? Adam yelled when he couldn't immediately understand what had happened. Basma merely pointed down at Hermione, and what they saw likewise stunned them into silence. A lion, a hawk, and an otter ran, swam, and flew across Hermione's skin. Occasionally, their figures rippled out of her skin to become almost solid. Adam reached forward only to quickly snatch his hand back again as the lion slashed at it with two real claws and an audible hiss. Incredible, Adam breathed. Yes, yes, incredible. How am I supposed to bathe her if I cannot touch her? Basma was clearly frustrated and sucked on her bleeding finger. Maybe, Ardith said with uncertainty. Maybe because she does not know you and is unconscious it is reacting like this. Ardith took a cautious step forward. He sat down next to Hermione and held his hand out just within swiping reach. They all held their breaths as the tattoo lion stepped out across her skin to sniff his hand, while maintaining eye contact with Ardith like a real live lion would as it assessed the prey before them. Basma and Adam breathed an audible sigh of relief as the lion began to rub up against Ardith's hand like a house cat, and Ardith in return rubbed the lifelike mane with a finger. Magic is so amazing, Ardith said with wonder. Ardith marveled as the otter splashed him with real water and chittered as it swam past all the while, eluding the hawk that flew after it playfully across Hermione's skin. Ardith picked up the fallen cloth and began to bathe Hermione's face. Despite your reservations, Alumu, I think I'm the only one other than maybe Evelyn that it wouldn't attack. Why don't you let me do it? And after Miss O'Connell has had some rest, she can take a turn. I know Hermione is probably okay with it if her protector is. Ardith grinned as the lion lazily yawned and licked its paws. Basma grumbled, but let Adam pull her past the curtain to the kitchen. He is right, Habibi. It is not as if he will act inappropriately, or at least any more inappropriately, than he has been on a week-long trip with Europeans. He probably has had his share of private time with Miss Evans already. Adam's comment earned himself a well-deserved smack to the arm. Irritating man, Basma said with agitation, but was clearly not all that upset when she grinned soon afterwards. Ardith is getting married. He is. Adam pulled her into a hug. No more pining. No more grumbling about finding Miss Evans, Basma chuckled. He was pining for years. How did we survive it? It is a pity we don't drink. It may have gone by faster. And Adam waggled his eyebrows meaningfully. We shall finally have a tent all to ourselves, my darling. How wonderful! Basma grinned into Adam's kiss at an exclamation from Ardith. I can hear you, Ardith called from behind the curtain. I shall enjoy regaling to his lovely fiancé the tales of the lengthy pining of Ardith Bay, Basma mused with amusement before planting another kiss on Adam and making her way to make some tea. Ardith sighed from where he sat. He couldn't even deny it. He had brooded, chased after any rumor of Hermione, but she was too good to be caught if she didn't want to be. Ardith grinned as his finger chased the otter across her skin. Ardith had caught her. And a fiery hawk devoured the Anubis warriors, and Miss Evans withstood it looking as fierce and magnificent as Bast herself, with her lion incinerating the entire wave of the army. Alex sat in rapt attention as Ali told the story of Hermione's fiendfire. Do you think that Auntie would do it so that I can see? Alex fiercely whispered to his mother. Absolutely not, Alex. That is most definitely dangerous, and Hermione couldn't stand afterwards. Evelyn couldn't deny her own intense desire to see it, however. It certainly sounded incredible. I'm sure Hermione will be willing to show you other things. Just wait until she is better. But when will that be? Alex whined. They had not seen hide nor hair of Hermione since they had arrived at the camp. It was dinner time, and certainly his auntie was tired. But other than their current story time, the day had been unbearably boring with his mother not letting him out of her sight for a single second. Alex, Evelyn sighed affectionately. How about you let me watch the scamp? Jonathan offered. Go be mushy with your ghastly American. I'll keep him entertained. I'm sure you will, Evelyn said with narrowed eyes. Come on, honey, Rick hugged Evelyn around the waist. How much trouble can they get into with the Medjai watching out for them? Plus, we can check in on Hermione as I know you would like to. Oh, all right, Evelyn relented. Do not get into any trouble, young man, and for heaven's sakes, no putting on any more bracelets. It was only one time, Alex exclaimed. It was only one book, Rick marked. 12 years ago. I think I've proven that I won't do it again, Evelyn scoffed, until you opened a chest that nearly drowned us. Rick and Evelyn's arguing could be heard for several minutes as they walked away. Ali, Jonathan said with a grunt as he sat down. Why don't you regale my nephew with all the ways our lovely Hermione has outsmarted the dastardly men in black? Ali groaned as several of the men around the fire began to laugh uproariously. If I'm telling my story, I expect everyone else to share theirs as well. Ali glared over at the guffawing men, who suddenly looked a little less amused. What did she do? Alex finally sat down next to Uncle John in excitement, completely forgetting his earlier boredom. Ardith was nodding off next to Hermione. He was doing his best to stay awake to watch over her, but even his endurance couldn't last forever. Ardith wanted nothing more than to lay down next to her, but Alumu would have a conniption if he so much as suggested it. Knock, knock. Ardith turned to see Evelyn in the doorway. How is she doing? Sleeping, Ardith sighed as he rubbed his eyes tiredly. She hasn't stirred once. You look tired, Evelyn smiled sympathetically. Would you like me to take a turn watching over her? Yes, Ardith said with hesitation, but the lion has to like you. Evelyn blinked tiredly. What lion? Evelyn said blankly. Ardith chuckled without energy as he finally escaped Evelyn's endless questions and excitement. Hermione was going to lose an ear from Evelyn's incessant questions when she woke up. Rick was nodding off on the cushions when he came out. Evelyn has agreed to sit over Hermione for me. Why don't we find your family and me someplace to sleep? Rick let out a jaw-cracking yawn and just nodded. 48 hours with no sleep were doing none of them any favors. When they came back to fire, Alex was desperately attempting to stay awake to hear the stories. Jonathan, who had heard most of them from Hermione's perspective, was still enjoying putting faces to her many antics and paid no heed to Alex's head as it nodded into sleep every couple of minutes, only to jerk upright when he caught himself falling asleep. However, it all stopped when Jonathan let out an unearthly shriek as Ardith placed a hand on his shoulder, and all the men immediately began laughing. "Must you always do that?" Ardith only shook his head with a smile and gave Jonathan a hand up while Rick picked up Alex. Chapter 25. Hermione was groggy and her mouth was coated in grit, and it was hot, so unbearably hot. She attempted to wave a cooling charm over herself, and nothing happened. Hermione could feel her magic there, but it was weak, and even raising her hand had taken an incredible amount of effort. She had really put herself in a state. Hermione started feebly as she felt a cold, wet cloth go across her forehead. "You were starting to scare me," Evelyn said soothingly. Hermione opened her mouth to speak, but simply ended up choking on her non-existent spit. "Water," Hermione finally croaked out. She felt blessed relief as Evelyn helped her sit up to drink. Hermione drank it all. "Hermione!" Hermione was unable to respond as she fell back into exhausted sleep. Ardith came back to a pacing Evelyn the next morning. She woke up, Evelyn rushed forward, but she just asked for water and immediately fell back asleep. Ardith kneeled next to Hermione and checked her over, sweating and chapped lips, but she was breathing just fine. "How much more sleep is she going to need?" "Just give her time," Ardith soothed. "I'll take over Evelyn. Go get some sleep." "Fine." Evelyn blew out a gust of air in frustration and exited the tent. Ardith settled next to Hermione. She was less pale, but clearly not enjoying the heat. Ardith wiped her down until all the sweat was gone. He felt for Evelyn. He desperately wanted her to wake up also. Evelyn made her way to the dirigible filled with anger and frustration. She had gotten some sleep next to Hermione. Evelyn wished that there was more that could be done, but Hermione was clearly going to take her sweet time making her way to the land of the living. Evelyn walked in on her son, poking the bound monster book of monsters with fascination as it struggled against the belt. She felt a devilish grin spread across her face. It was time for some mother-son bonding time. "Alex," Evelyn called. Alex jumped back and immediately threw his hands up. "I wasn't touching it." Alex scowled at his mother's laughter. "Alex," Evelyn grinned. "Would you like to have some fun?" The newer recruits to the Medjai were currently sweating under the glare of Dr. Terence Bay. They were the few that hadn't gone to defeat the army of Anubis, and it was always Terence's job to put the fear of Allah into them, and in short, to verbally berate them before they received their city training that had begun after the disappearance of Hermione. Terence was so busy relaying his soliloquy about the importance of expecting the unexpected, etc., etc., that he didn't even notice the sneaking Evelyn and Alex approaching behind him. Several of the men looked at them curiously, but immediately whipped their faces back to the doctor when he snapped at them to pay attention. Therefore no one saw it coming when the book came chomping towards him. Terence would never regain his reputation as a fearsome elder among this particular set of recruits, due to the burlesque screech of alarm that emitted from his throat. Even more so when Rick came running up with guns drawn, only to nonchalantly catch the book that the Medjai were advancing on with drawn swords, and immediately calm it by running his finger along its spine. Terence just stood in spluttering silence, along with the rest of the Medjai, until Evelyn and Alex's explosive laughter could no longer be held back. "Hermione is a terrible influence on the two of you," Rick grinned and winked at the flabbergasted Terence before casually flipping open the book and walking off reading from where he had left off the other night. "Evelyn O'Connell." Terence yelled when he finally recovered. I'm going to check on Hermione, Evelyn burst out, dragging Alex behind her. That was absolutely brilliant, Mum. Terence observed the spreading smirks on the recruits' faces with trepidation and groaned. Hermione Evans would never stop being the death of him, would she? Hermione groaned as she heard loud yelling coming from the other section of the tent. She felt better, much better. Hermione could feel her magic thrumming gently within her chest. She sat up with many popping joints and thankfully found her purse and her replenishing potions easily enough. It was at that point that Hermione actually processed the actual words that were being yelled. They are your friends, Ardith Bay. Make them stop, a voice that was clearly Terence Bay blasted through the tent. It is harmless fun, Terence, Adam admonished calmly. At my expense, Terence said somewhat hysterically. At least take that blasted book away from them. His fiancée's book, I might add. Hermione grinned to herself as she realized what must be going on. The monster book of monsters was certainly living to terrorize another day. Hermione staggered to her feet. Her breath must smell like a cat died in it. Her cat. Hermione had left Harry alone for Merlin knows how long. And sure, he had a magically filling water and food bowl, but the poor boy was probably going crazy. Hermione didn't think about telling anyone where she was going. She magically pulled everything of hers into her purse out of habit and apparated to her home. Ardith felt his heart leave his chest as he heard the snap from his sleeping space sound through his tent. Immediately abandoning his uncle, he burst through the tent flap to see no one. Everything that spoke of Hermione's presence was gone. All her belongings gone. Hermione gone. Ardith immediately sat down on the ground in shock. Was Hermione running away from him again? Harry was suitably angry at Hermione. After his initial meow and snuggle of happiness, he scratched the shit out of her arm. Hermione was currently sitting on the floor next to her bed, trying to coax him out from under it. It took her an hour to get him out from under it and into the pet carrier. After brushing her teeth and grabbing some clothes, Hermione was finally ready to go back to the desert. Hermione dropped back into the space unseen by the manically pacing and frankly furious Ardith. Hermione watched him with quiet confusion as she continued to go unnoticed. After getting over his initial shock at her disappearance, Ardith tried to give Hermione time to come back, but now it had been too long and he was furious. Currently, he was calculating and plotting in his mind on how he was going to camp outside her front door until he got a suitable explanation from Hermione. Ardith was damned if he was going to wait another 11 years for Hermione to come back. He apparently couldn't leave the sneaky witch for a single moment until they bound their souls together. Hermione quietly set down Harry's carrier after several minutes of Ardith's frantic pacing and stepped forward to quietly block his path. Ardith stopped violently and abruptly as he finally spotted her feet, and his eyes snapped to Hermione's. Hermione pulled in a sharp breath as she saw just how uncharacteristically dark and angry Ardith's eyes were. Ardith was upset. Why was he upset? Hermione opened her mouth to speak of her concern. Find out what happened while she slept. Was something wrong? But Ardith didn't give Hermione the opportunity. She let out a startled yell that was immediately silenced as Ardith pounced on her and kissed her fiercely. He couldn't even think past the fact that Hermione was there. He was frustrated that she could inadvertently, if her obvious confusion could be believed, cause Ardith to so completely lose his mind, but even that thought didn't come clearly to him until much later. All he could really think about clearly was that Ardith didn't care what his Alumu thought of it. This woman was not leaving his sight until he bound her to him permanently. Ardith had been a gentleman, their entire acquaintance. Other than his momentary loss of temper at Hermione's consistent avoidance of him, he had been perfectly well behaved. Even when she did everything in her power to decompose him by sitting on Ardith's lap and giving him sweet kisses with that wicked grin of hers. Ardith kissed Hermione like he had always dreamed to do, with one hand gripping her beautiful, wild hair and the other pressing the small of her back so she was arched into him. Ardith only stopped when Hermione was entirely dependent on him to stand and panting breathlessly. "What?" Hermione cleared her throat out in an attempt to speak clearly, but immediately stopped when Ardith's mouth moved to her neck to bite and suck on one spot of her neck until Hermione could feel the heat of a bruise forming. "Ah!" Hermione started to try to pull away in a half-hearted attempt to think clearly, but immediately gave up as Ardith pulled her waist to him more tightly and used his hold on her hair to pull Hermione's head around and began biting and sucking on the other side. Ardith felt supreme satisfaction as Hermione's breathing notably increased. "What?" Hermione finally pushed out. "Is something wrong, Ardith?" Ardith pulled away and loosened his hold fractionally. Hermione was disheveled, beautifully disheveled. Ardith placed both his hands on either side of her neck and brushed his thumbs across the love bites forming. He grinned as Hermione's eyes closed and she pressed herself closer to him. "I thought you ran away from me again," Ardith admitted quietly. Hermione frowned and opened her eyes. "I had been away from home for several weeks. I had a few things to take care of," and Ardith raised brow in disbelief. "You couldn't tell me you would be right back." "I got flustered," Hermione said with a sheepish grin. "Harry gets upset if he is alone too long." I panicked. "And when do I get to meet Harry?" Ardith sighed. "He is the reigning power that I must appease to have your hand in marriage." "Right now," Hermione said with excitement before excitedly pulling away to grab the cat carrier. A disgruntled black cat laid regally in the carrier. Hermione pulled out the irritated feline. "Harry, Anna seed by mucobalatic." Ardith held his hand out so that Harry could sniff it. Harry reached his neck forward to sniff Ardith's wrist before surprising him and Hermione by jumping onto Ardith's arm to climb up to sit on his shoulder. Ardith held deathly still until Harry began to rub and purr and against his face. "Harry likes me," Ardith said smugly. "Jonathan is going to be so annoyed." Hermione snickered before scratching Harry behind his good ear. "It's settled then." "Does today sound like a good day to get married?" "It has to be," Ardith grinned. "I can't let you out of my sight. You might make a run for it again." "I will not," Hermione huffed. "And you will have to let me out of your sight if you want me to get a magical efficient for the soul binding." Ardith pursed his lips. "Fine," he sighed. "But if you don't come back when you say you will, there shall be hell to pay." "I'll leave you Harry as a sign of good faith," Hermione joked with a roll of her eyes. "Fine," Ardith returned seriously. He gave Hermione a kiss. "You go get your efficient. We will be married tonight." Hermione started to kiss Ardith back deeply until Harry nudged his face between the two of them with an engine-like purr. "You are going to have to share her with me, you know," Ardith said to the cat seriously. Now, play nice boys," Hermione chuckled. Hermione pecked Harry on the cheek and then Ardith. "I have a goblin to see." "A goblin," Ardith said with surprise, but Hermione just waved with a grin before popping out. "To what do I owe this pleasure?" Snaggletooth sneered at Hermione. "Are you able to form a soul bond between a witch and a muggle?" Hermione said bluntly. Snaggletooth's mouth dropped in surprise. It was not common in their current time for witches and wizards to marry non-magicals. "I suppose I could," Snaggletooth said noncommittally. "But it would not be legal in the eyes of your ministry in Britain," Snaggletooth said with distaste. "Not important," Hermione waved off. "We are having a muggle ceremony. And all muggles present have been aware of magic for a long time." Snaggletooth stared at Hermione with narrowed eyes until suddenly grinning sharply. "Then we have only to set a price." "Of course," Hermione said with a good-humored roll of her eyes. "Here is your port key." Hermione passed over the illegal port key. "We will see you there tonight. Here is the first half of your wages. I will give you the rest after the ceremony is completed." "I suppose I need to dress up for the occasion," Snaggletooth said with distaste. "Just don't show up naked," Hermione snorted. "I couldn't care less if you show up in dress robes or not." Hermione pulled her dragon skin coat on. "He is a lucky man," Snaggletooth said with a sarcastic sneer. "Don't be jealous, Snaggletooth," Hermione winked. "Just leave, Lady Witch," Snaggletooth sneered. Be still, mine heart. Hermione held her heart dramatically and then left the bank. She returned midday to the Medjai camp to preparations for the marriage in full swing. Ow! Hermione held her arm where Evelyn had smacked it angrily. You were asleep for a whole week. Evelyn smacked her again. And you aren't even going to have a hen party with me. You are getting married in a matter of hours. You don't even have a wedding dress. Hermione wordlessly shoved a bundle into Evelyn's arms from the bag she was holding. Evelyn didn't move and just continued to glare at her. Just open it, Hermione said with a roll of her eyes. Evelyn sighed before opening it to find a beautiful set of dark grey silk witch robes. Evelyn's mouth dropped. I bought a white one, Hermione said with a grin. I also had to plan a surprise for Ardith. Evelyn's mouth dropped even further when Hermione removed a bandage from her face to reveal Ardith's name in Arabic on the right side along her jaw. Hermione immediately covered it up again and pulled her hair back over to hide it. I obviously want it to be a surprise, so will you help me avoid Ardith? We can have a hen party in my tent until the wedding begins. Yes, Evelyn burst out with excitement. Hermione immediately set up her tent next to them, and they disappeared inside. Have you seen Hermione? Rick looked up to a nervous Ardith and a grinning Adam. I have, but I also am supposed to tell you that it is against European tradition to see the bride for the wedding. Evelyn is keeping her company and giving her a hen party. I am also to give you a stag party in your family tent until the wedding begins. Rick grinned. Evelyn had told him the surprise Hermione had planned. Rick didn't know why Hermione was still able to surprise him. That woman was clearly capable of anything at this point, but Rick had nearly died from shock when he heard Hermione was willing to tattoo a man's name on her face, not to mention getting all that she had gotten done in the small span of time she had. Also, if any strange creatures show up, please not try to kill them. Apparently the officiant of the magic part of your ceremony is a goblin. Alex was positively giddy when he heard. What's a goblin? Adam asked in bafflement. I can show you a picture in the book my son keeps pranking Doctor. Bay with, Rick said happily. I'll meet you in your tent. Rick found his son about to let said book loose on an unfortunate group of camels. Hey, Rick grabbed the book out of Alex's hands. No more. Think of a new prank to entertain yourself with. But there is nothing to do here, Alex whined. Your Aunt Hermione is back and in her tent over there. Go ask her. Alex immediately bolted in the direction Rick had pointed. That would keep him busy. Alex hadn't seen the inside of Hermione's tent yet. He was going to lose his mind. Cool. Hermione and Evelyn looked up away from where Hermione was adjusting Evelyn's robes. Hermione chuckled as Alex spent the rest of the time until the wedding sussing out the entire tent while the women got ready and then sat down for their hen party. How are you feeling? Evelyn coughed as she sipped on the fire whiskey. Hermione ran her finger around the rim of the mug of much sweeter butterbeer. What if he regrets it? Hermione said nervously. Hermione glared at Evelyn as she scoffed. Very attractive, Hermione said sarcastically. Ardith Bay has not rested a single moment since you started running away from him, Evelyn said derisively. He did not spend the last 11 years chasing you for no reason. Hermione sighed with annoyance as Evelyn flicked her in the head painfully. Get it through your head. For someone so smart, you can be exceedingly stupid where Ardith is concerned. All right, Hermione flicked Evelyn in the forehead hard right back. What was that for? Evelyn rubbed her head. Alex told me you died and were brought back to life while you went to the loo. Hermione glared at Evelyn, who shrugged sheepishly. That was for dying. I deserved that, Evelyn sighed. And now, Evelyn chugged the last of her fire whiskey and immediately burped out a spurt of fire. Oh, heavens. As I was saying, time to get you dressed. Hermione chugged the last of her butterbeer and went to her bedroom. And time to tame my atrocious lion's mane, Hermione said somberly. It won't be that bad, Evelyn attempted to soothe. So innocent, Hermione said, as she gave Evelyn a patronizing pat on the head. Ardith was a mess. His father watched with amusement as he bounced his knee nervously. Ardith was already dressed in light brown robes with gold threading. Hastily made wood marriage bands courtesy of a dam's whittling skills, which he hadn't remembered he needed, until Rick asked what he was planning on getting married with. They were sitting ready on the table, and Ardith was supremely grateful for Rick O'Connell and his father's hobbies at that moment. Alumu bustled around them doing her part for the marriage feast and giving her son the occasional happy kiss to the cheek. So Rick started as he sipped on a glass of fire whiskey courtesy of Hermione. "Need any tips?" Ardith stopped bouncing nervously and looked at Rick in confusion. "Tips for what?" "Sex, Adam, Alumu." Rick and Jonathan all answered at once, and Ardith immediately turned beet red. "You are about to lose your virginity, old chap." Jonathan clapped Ardith on the back, and Ardith glared at him in embarrassment. "There is no shame in getting advice," Rick sang. "Do you know where to put your dingling?" Ardith dropped his head in hands. "Yes," Ardith's defeated and muffled voice came out. "You do know what he means by dingling," Adam said with a smirk. "Yes," Ardith ground out. "You mean his penis, right?" Basma questioned. "Yes, Alumu." Ardith couldn't believe he was in this situation. "You know, Ardith, there is this trick I do with my tongue." Jonathan kept going, and Ardith wished Allah would take his life then and there. Snaggletooth stood bored in front of an entire group of muggles, desperately trying not to stare at him. The idiots were not succeeding. Finally, the man he could only assume was the groom stood to stand in front of him with another man who looked at him curiously. "Is there anything I will need to do for the soul binding?" Snaggletooth grinned with his sharp teeth and held up a ceremonial knife. "I'll let you know." Snaggletooth was begrudgingly impressed when the muggle nodded solemnly, without any sign of fear, along with the burly man next to him. "So you're a goblin." Snaggletooth looked over with a bored sneer at a child of 10. "And you are a nitwit," Snaggletooth returned blandly. "Alex," Rick said warningly. "Come on, Dad," Alex whined. "When am I going to meet someone as awesome as a goblin?" The boy turned back to him. "Do you get to see dragons? Hermione says the goblins have the most amazing bank ever with dragons and magic waterfalls." "Did you get to train the dragons?" Snaggletooth looked at the boy emotionlessly. "Awesome. Wizards and witches generally had their pompous heads so far up their asses they couldn't see how superior the goblins were." Snaggletooth was secretly preening under Alex's admiration. "I prefer setting curses on the vaults. I like to trap thieves in with the desired treasure until they starve." Snaggletooth grinned with vicious sharp teeth, and Alex watched with wide-eyed awe. "Maybe we should employ some of those measures ourselves," Ardith said thoughtfully. "What was the salt acid trap?" Rick said blandly. "Those were put up years ago. Most of them have been set off long ago." Ardith shrugged. Snaggletooth held his clawed hand out with his card. Ardith took it carefully after he got over his surprise at it being offered to him. "I'd be most happy to assist," Snaggletooth said with calculating eyes. "For a price, as your lady witch is well aware of." "Unfortunately," Snaggletooth continued wistfully, "she isn't a fool, but business with her is delightfully challenging in a way I don't often get to enjoy." "Your business will be welcome." The ceremonial music of the tribe began to play, and Ardith's eyes immediately went down the aisle while absent-mindedly pocketing the goblin's card. Alex attempted to whisper another question, but his mouth was immediately covered, and he received a stern glare from his father. Hermione, Evelyn, and Jonathan stood together just out of sight, inside the entrance of a tent nearby. "Are you sure that you don't want to make a run for it and come back in 11 years? Jonathan snarked. "You're just jealous Harry likes Ardith," Hermione said a bit queasy. "I'll believe it when I see it, all that fish. And the cat-cad liked him just because he wears black," Jonathan scoffed. "Wears black," Evelyn said with amusement as she fussed over Hermione's face, covering and making sure it covered her face tattoo. Hermione wore the traditional red scarf on top of her head and face covering, but had the white silk and lace witch's robes underneath. "Well, what other reason can you think of?" Jonathan said sullenly. "Harry is my witch's familiar," Hermione interjected. "He is connected to my magical core. Chances are," Hermione didn't notice the surprise at her serious answer. Chances are Harry not only understood you saying you didn't like cats, but also understood that him liking you would be a sign of his approval as you being my mate. I was already quite in love with Ardith at the time. Harry probably sensed it. Hermione looked up from where she was fussing with the dessert flowers she had picked up in the city to see Evelyn and Jonathan's open-mouthed stares. Hermione reached forward and closed their mouths, and could hear the music starting outside. Ali entered the tent and immediately grinned shyly. "I am here to escort you down the aisle." Ali held his arm out. Hermione shoved at Evelyn and Jonathan, and the two finally got their shit together and began to exit. "Thank you again for the honor, Miss Evans." "Well," Hermione smiled. "I felt bad that you sprained your ankle after I pushed you in the river, and as far as I am concerned, you are a friend. I look forward to getting to know you, and the rest of the Medjai. Do you think that there is hope our game will start again?" "Yes," Ali said a little too loud and immediately blushed in embarrassment. Hermione laughed and looped her arm in his and took one last fortifying breath before stepping out of the tent. Ardith lost his breath. Hermione was beautiful. He grinned big and Hermione grinned right back. It was finally happening. When Hermione was finally in front of him, Ardith gripped her hands. "Present a hand each," Snaggletooth said roughly. Hermione chuckled at his gruff manner. As soon as the couple kneeled and presented their hands, Snaggletooth swiped the blade across their palms and held the cuts to each other. "Animi teneter, Maginexa, numquam franger, solus in mort finiat, est. Souls bound, magic entwined, never to break, only at death will it end." "It is." The entire group shivered as the results of the ceremony spread through them. Ardith held his breath as he felt a foreign presence enter his body. He could feel Hermione's pulse. That hair-raising quality was in his breast. Everyone held their breath as the couple glowed for a moment and then breathed out when the feeling finally dissipated. "My fee, Lady Witch." Hermione let out a sudden and booming laugh before taking her uncut hand and pulling out the bag of gold. "Such a romantic Snaggletooth," Hermione smiled. "May your gold always shine bright, and may you sell fool's gold to many a fool," Snaggletooth said with one last nasty grin before snapping away. "Not such a bad philosophy," Jonathan said admiringly before oofing as Evelyn's elbow connected with his stomach. Ardith let out a short laugh of his own before giving Hermione a hand up. She waved her wand, healing their hands. "Uncle Terence," Ardith called with a twinkle in his eyes. Terence grumbled as he walked grumpily to head the ceremony. "Was one ceremony not enough?" Terence grumbled. "You can't deny your calling, Mr. Bay," Hermione said seriously. "Just hand me the rings, boy, so we can get this over with." Alex handed Terence the bag with the wood rings. Hermione admired the ring as Ardith put it on her finger. "I'll get you a more traditional one later," Ardith whispered to her. "Nope," Hermione whispered back. "I like this one." Ardith didn't think he could smile any bigger as she slipped his own ring on his finger. "Do you take this woman to be your wife, Ardith Bay?" Terence continued in a bored tone. "I do," Ardith said. "Do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband and victim, Hermione Granger?" Terence said with extreme sarcasm. "I do," Hermione said with amusement. "I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the witch." Terence grumpily walked off again. "That was much more civil than I thought he was going to be. Certainly more civil than last time." Hermione pulled down her face covering, and Ardith immediately froze as he saw his name. Ardith reached out carefully and traced the tattoo reverently. "I can't believe you actually did it." Ardith felt his eyes going misty. "I told you I would think about it. I already have several tattoos, you know." Hermione grinned. "Yes, I do know." Ardith's eyes twinkled and Hermione blushed. Ardith kissed the tattoo and then kissed his bride, and the entire crowd erupted in applause. Hermione and Ardith faced the tribe and Ardith's family. Basma immediately began to cry happily when she saw her son's name on his wife's face. Basma continued to cry and dab at her eyes happily as Hermione, Ardith, Adam, Terence, and Harry sat in their tent. "Why is the cat here?" Terence said grumpily. And who exactly is serving as the male head of Miss Granger's family to sign the paperwork for your wedding? The tradition in Muslim marriage for a legal marriage. Hermione immediately grinned big and pointed at Harry. He is the male head of my family. Adam and Ardith immediately began laughing. What? Terence screamed out. I'm so happy you continued the tradition, Evelyn said, as Hermione and Ardith sat down with their family after coming back from the main tent. What tradition would that be? Ardith said with a smile. The one to have a curmudgeon officiating, Evelyn said playfully. Not only one, Rick said with a smile. That goblin was very curmudgeonly and a bit terrifying. Goblins in general strive to be scary, Hermione nodded. He gave me his business card to help put curses on the tombs we protect, Ardith said as he handed it to Hermione. I am not surprised, Hermione snorted. Could you show me more magical creatures? Alex said with excitement. Now that I know you know about magic, I can show you as much as I can while still staying in Egypt, Hermione promised. You are always welcome at my house. Yes, can I go soon, Mom? Let the newlyweds have some time, Alex, Evelyn chastised. And you need to do some schoolwork. We have been away from England too long. We will come back in a few months. Blast, Alex grumbled. Language, Alex, Evelyn warned. FK buggering shit, Hermione interjected. Don't you start with me, Hermione, Evelyn whipped out. Alex grinned. He loved Aunt Hermione. How does it feel with the ball and chain, old boy? Jonathan asked a little drunkenly. Wonderful, my friend, Ardith said joyfully. It will be more wonderful tonight, Jonathan said while wiggling his eyebrows. Don't forget to do what I told you. Please don't take love advice from Jonathan, Hermione begged as she tuned into their conversation. I may not be good at love advice, but sex is another matter, Hermione. Ardith rubbed the bridge of his nose. It was hard enough to get through the first conversation. Jonathan, don't scare Hermione into thinking Ardith is taking your advice. He is obviously going to take my advice, Rick interjected confidently. You jest. Why would he take advice from a brash American? Jonathan said too loudly. Why would he take advice from an intellectual who has to pay women to have sex with him? Apparently, Jonathan wasn't the only one who was drinking too much. Boys, Evelyn was not impressed. Congratulations, Hermione, Ardith. I'm going to take these two to bed before they get into a brawl. Evelyn stopped and spoke into Ardith's ear. But Rick is right, Evelyn whispered. Come on, Alex. Fine, Alex sighed. I can come to your house in a few months. Count on it. Hermione chuckled at his puppy eyes and gave Alex a hug before he followed his mother. Ardith and Hermione were alone for the first time since they had been married. So, Hermione grinned. What was Jonathan's advice? It actually wasn't half bad, Ardith admitted. What was it? Hermione said with even more curiosity. I'll show you tonight. Ardith's eyes twinkled. He gave Hermione a wonderful kiss before standing up. I'll be back. Tease, Hermione muttered. Every once in a while someone from the tribe would walk up, and Hermione would converse happily with them. Children looked at her in awe while their parents asked her questions about the battle with the army of Anubis. Hermione wished Evelyn had stayed. She was never very good with talking to mass amounts of strangers. You do enjoy making Terence lose his mind, Basma said, as her and Adam sat down at head on the cushion next to Hermione's at the feast. Ardith was off being congratulated and dancing a celebratory dance with his fellow warriors. Hermione was glad to see someone that she knew. He doesn't make it all that difficult, Hermione smirked. Terence had lost his mind when Hermione had actually dipped Harry's paw in ink and placed his paw print on the paperwork. When you and Ardith have had enough time together, I'll teach you to make Ardith's favorite meal. And Terence's least favorite. Basma grinned evilly and winked at Hermione, who laughed loudly. I'll remember that. Adam hates it also. I usually only make it if I am punishing the both of them, Basma said conversationally. Adam grimaced from his position next to his wife. No one can punish someone like Basma can, Adam agreed. Especially with food. Hazib hates mint tea, Farah said as she walked up. He has grown to fear the smell alone. Adam immediately got right back up. When the two of them joined forces, it was best to make a swift retreat. I'll leave you to bestow your wisdom on the younger generation, my beautiful, amazing, smart wife. Adam kissed his wife on the cheek. Way to lay it on thick, Farah laughed. Adam gave a parting glare to Farah and made a run for it. Mint tea with honey is my favorite, Hermione said with a smile. I shall make sure to invite you over next time I am angry at him, Farah said conspiratorially. My daughter, Basma said warmly. This is my best friend, Farah. Her husband, Hazib, is the one you tricked into the brothel. Oh, Hermione choked on a drink. Oh dear. Farah began to laugh. He was so nervous when he came home, Farah said through her laughter. He was absolutely petrified. Don't worry. Hermione nodded in relief, and they all sipped their coffee while Hermione listened to the older women. After a couple of minutes, Farah smiled admiringly at Hermione. This, Farah traced her hand along Hermione's jaw tattoo. It is very heartwarming. You will make a perfect Zojet Elzeum for our tribe. Hermione blushed to be referred to as such. It hadn't really occurred to me, Hermione smiled nervously, that I was the chieftain's wife. There wasn't much time to think about it, and I'm pretty sure Ardith would have throttled anyone who dared to suggest waiting to discuss these things. Ardith walked up on them as they were laughing. How is my wife? Is Alumu telling you embarrassing stories about me? Ardith sat close to Hermione. We were trying to think about what Hermione should do to punish you, Farah said teasingly. Oh, I assure you, Ardith said seriously. Hermione has more than enough ideas in her arsenal. Witches and wizards are very creative, Hermione said with a grin. Maybe a bat bogey curse to start. Bat bogey, Basma said. What does it do? Well, Ardith got paler and paler the more Hermione went into detail. Witches and wizards were absolutely insane. Several hours into the night, Adam was sitting with his new daughter, son, and wife. Will you be staying in our tent tonight, or your tent, Hermione? Adam said with a yawn. I was actually planning on taking Ardith up on his offer to experience the other forms of travel that witches and wizards partake in, Hermione said with a mischievous grin. When did I offer that? Ardith said with confusion. When you were insulting my flying abilities, Hermione said innocently. You aren't still angry about that, Ardith said with alarm. Angry? Me? Ardith did not like this at all. Adam grinned to himself. The tides had turned. Ardith's turn had come. Don't worry, Hermione said in the opposite of a soothing manner. You'll only throw up the first couple times. Safe travels, my son, Adam said a little too gleefully. Ardith sighed. He wasn't going to enjoy this, was he? After they had made all their goodbyes, it was time to go. He didn't know what he was expecting, but Ardith certainly wasn't used to his organs being squeezed in such awful ways, or feeling like he was free falling through the air. When they finally stopped moving, Ardith managed to land on his feet, but stumbled woozily as Hermione, Harry, and him arrived outside Hermione's house in a nearby alley. You all right? Hermione said with amusement. What was that? Ardith really wanted to vomit. Apparition. You get used to it, Hermione grinned. After Ardith gained his ability to stand upright, Hermione led him to her home. As they walked in, Hermione set Harry free and turned to her husband. How do you like our home? Ardith looked around. It's incredible, but I don't think I will be able to stay here full time. I am still the chief of my tribe, Ardith said regretfully. Hermione smiled mysteriously. You will be able to when I connect your tent to it. Then you can be here and with your tribe whenever you want. Ardith kissed Hermione passionately, and Hermione put her hand in his curly hair. You are mine, Ardith said reverently as he kissed the tattoo on Hermione's face again. You keep saying that, Hermione laughed. And I'm going to keep saying it every day forever. Ardith looked around. Where is your bedroom? Hermione pointed to the second floor, and Ardith looked at the stairs skeptically. How am I supposed to get up if the stairs are going to turn into a slide? Creativity, Hermione smirked. Ardith stared at her until Hermione finally started laughing. There is a book ladder right there. Hermione pointed to it before walking up the stairs, and Ardith shrugged before making his way towards the ladder that immediately slid away from him. Ardith frowned as he took another step, and it slid away on its wheels again. He ran, and it slid quickly back to where it started. Ardith did this for several minutes before stopping, slightly breathless. "Hermione," Ardith growled, and Hermione grinned from her spot on the stairs. "Ardith," Hermione returned playfully. "Is there a secret to actually climbing the ladder?" Ardith said tiredly. "Say please." Ardith looked at Hermione in disbelief, and back to the ladder and back to her. If Hermione was messing with him, he would make her pay as soon as he got to the top. "May I please, mister?" Ardith began a bit helplessly. "Henry," Hermione supplied. Ardith looked at her like she was crazy before sighing again. "May I please climb to the top on your rungs, Mr. Henry?" The ladder slowly slid to be right in front of him. Ardith cautiously reached out and was finally able to grab on. He climbed quickly to the top and swung onto the landing. "Thank you, Henry." Hermione kissed Ardith. "I told you, I get bored," Hermione smiled. "The heavens know I will never be bored again," Ardith said with wonder. "No," Hermione gave Ardith a passionate kiss again. "You won't." Chapter 26. Ardith felt the bed next to him, empty. He sighed when he smelled chocolate and bread. Hermione was baking croissants again. She always picked the most complicated recipes when the worst dreams came upon her. Ardith had grossly underestimated what Hermione had meant by only sleeping 2 days a week. He had thought on some level she was exaggerating. In actuality, Hermione was being optimistic. Every night, Hermione would wait for Ardith to fall asleep, and then go through the night reading or brewing, or if the memories were haunting her, baking. And Ardith tried to influence Hermione to sleep more. The first few months, he would wake up constantly and immediately pull her back to bed. But Ardith had also grossly underestimated how unbelievably stubborn Hermione could be. Ardith had felt like smacking himself. Hermione had clearly shown that she was more than capable of sticking to her guns and avoiding him for 11 straight years without even a single drop of sweat. He should have known that even though they were married and beginning to share their lives, Hermione would be just as stubborn and set in the way she lived regardless of them being married. Ardith's father had certainly been right. Ardith was not ready to get married all those years ago, and hadn't even possessed even an ounce of the patience he was implementing on a daily basis for the health of his marriage. Ardith pushed himself into a sitting position and made his way over to the kitchen. Hermione was beautiful with her messy hair and robe rolling and re-rolling the chocolate through the dough. Harry meowed at Ardith in greeting as he entered, and Hermione startled slightly. "I woke you up again," Hermione said with a sigh. "You were asleep for once," Ardith said calmly. "I assume you had another nightmare. Will you tell me today?" That was the other difficulty Ardith had encountered. Hermione was a talker, but not a talker of the past. It pained her. She preferred to speak about magical theories. Ardith had no hope of understanding, or the Medjai's latest efforts to fortify the tombs with the help of the goblins. But over time, Ardith had realized that the surest way of slowly learning those secrets was to ask when the memories were already at the surface. Hermione sagged her shoulders and placed a cooling charm over the dough to harden up the butter. "I was at the Battle of Hogwarts." She wiped her hands and covered the dough with a towel before sitting across from Ardith at their dinner table. "And I couldn't save anyone I already knew was going to die. And I tried to save the same people over and over again with the same result. No matter what I did, Carlin was still lying dead in the Great Hall. Fred was still buried in rubble, the only difference being that Beatrice Lestrange didn't die. She just got right back up with that horrific cackle of hers and struck down everyone. Harry stayed dead. Neville was tortured to insanity like his parents. The Weasley family became Death Eaters. I woke up just as I was about to be torn to shreds by Fenrir Greyback after Ron shoved me at him." Hermione was no longer looking at Ardith. Her head was down and her hands shielding her from view. Ardith could see the tears dropping down on the table. Ardith wanted nothing more than to comfort Hermione in these moments, but he couldn't. Not until she was ready, and not until she had said her piece. Hermione needed to talk through it, or the horrors would never leave her mind. When Hermione didn't venture forth with more information, Ardith finally took her hand and spoke an idea that had been creeping into his mind over the last few months. "How about you give the memories to someone else?" Ardith said cautiously. Hermione wiped the tears away the best she could before looking at Ardith in confusion. Ardith couldn't mean using a pensive. Hermione hadn't told him what one was yet. "So, what do you mean?" Hermione said in tired confusion. "Write your story, and give the memory to someone else." "So, they are not yours anymore." Ardith knew that Hermione was skeptical. She was doing that annoying eyebrow thing of hers. "You think writing a character that has my memories will make things better? Or change the ending to make things better?" "Just make the memories leave your mind," Ardith said soothingly. "They are crowding your brain, torturing you. Make them leave." Hermione pursed her lips. "Wouldn't that just make me think of them more?" Hermione said quietly. "Or it could help you detach from them," Ardith said persuasively. "And if you want to, it could be a good way of telling me, and anyone else you would like to tell your story without having to retell it over and over again, someone like Evelyn." Hermione winced. They had not seen Evelyn since the battle with the army of Anubis and their wedding, but they would see them soon. And Hermione was not going to like the interrogation that followed. Hermione had been carefully avoiding certain questions in Evelyn's letters. But Evelyn was not the type of woman to be denied, and if she had the promise of the information she wanted in a book, it would certainly give Hermione the time she needed to hold her at bay. "All right, I'll try," Hermione finally said with resignation. "That's all I ask." Ardith bumped his head against hers. "Why don't you finish your croissants, and we can go to bed and drive away the memories?" Ardith's eyes twinkled with promise, and Hermione grinned. Or Hermione stood and gave Ardith a deep kiss. "I can finish the croissants after, instead of you trying to trick me into going back to sleep after helping me forget." "I would never, whatever you say, my love." "Oh, Allah, she's back," the cafe owner muttered as he stopped in his tracks and stared at the woman he never thought he'd see again. "Baba," his son spilled hot coffee on his sleeve as he only nearly avoided running into his father's back. He frowned as his father didn't answer, but just continued staring at a foreign woman. "Baba, what is wrong?" "Oh," the owner shook himself out of his trance. He hadn't expected to see the troublemaker ever again. After all, it had been years since she had graced his presence. Not a single drink thrown or newspaper stolen. The owner had seen the Arab men with their ominous tattoos often, but never her. "An old customer is back." "Old?" his son asked with clear confusion. "That one. She doesn't look old to me," he hissed as his father clipped him on the back of the head. "Baba, what did I say? Just get back to work. Not the European." "I'll serve her." The owner quickly served the tray he was holding and walked brusquely over to her table. "Do my eyes deceive me, or is it my favorite troublemaker?" "It is." Hermione grinned. "You have a good memory for an old man. Disrespectful little chit, aren't you?" he laughed. "That isn't the first time someone has called me exactly that." Hermione laughed with him. "Will you be coming by often?" The owner smiled hopefully. The woman was delightfully entertaining, and he had enjoyed the extra money she gave him. "Yes. My old friends have decided to begin our old game again." Hermione smiled mischievously. "Wonderful. Amal." His son immediately rushed to his side. "This lady will cause us many problems, but she will reimburse us handsomely. Do not call the authorities on her. Do you understand?" Amal nodded, but was clearly incredibly confused. "Thank you again for your understanding." Hermione passed him some money. "Might I borrow that glass of water, please?" Amal passed it over. Hermione immediately strode with purpose across the cafe, threw it in black-robed gentleman's face, slammed the glass down on the table, and took off down the street. Amal was shoved to the side as the gentleman in question ran off after her while his father laughed throatily next to him. "Baba." "Why did she do that?" Amal blustered. I have no idea. The owner shook his head while he counted the bills she had passed to him. But it is not the last time. I missed that girl. Amal stared after his grinning father. Europeans were definitely strange. Hermione fit into the tribe seamlessly. Once Hermione grew comfortable with them, she effortlessly carved her own role with ease. One of those roles was, of course, training within the city, but also as a healer. All right, father-in-law of mine, it is time to check in on that chest injury of yours. Adam looked at his daughter-in-law in surprise. What is there to check? I am fine as a horse. Really, Hermione said sarcastically. Your wife and son say that your stamina is not what it should be, and that after what happened with Lackner, that even a long ride is difficult for you. And yet Basma will tell you that it doesn't stop me from having long rides. Basma blushed as she smacked Adam on the back of the head. She is a witch, you stubborn man. Hermione has looked at every other person in the village, and it is your turn. I suggest you do so if you don't want Fatir Baladi for dinner. Adam glowered at his wife before groaning. Blackmailed by my own family, maybe Terence is right. Not marrying is certainly sounding appealing. Oh, is it? Adam immediately stood and ushered Hermione out of the tent at Basma's terrifying look. Well, we should go to your tent for my examination so that Basma can have some alone time. Hermione followed Adam in amusement. Your self-preservation skills could use some sharpening up, Hermione grinned before entering her tent. Ardith was sat with scrolls and nodded politely to his father. They finally got you to agree, Ardith smirked. Under protest, Adam groaned before sitting down on their couch. After several diagnoses, spells, Hermione looked at Adam in angry concern. As impressed as I am by your capabilities to walk around with a damaged lung, you are a moron. Adam didn't even have the chance to exclaim in surprise. Hermione simply began administering spells and giving him vials to drink, and by the end of it, Adam felt like a new person. The ever-present ache was gone. All the pain was gone. He felt like a new man. And that new man was enduring his wife, whacking him repeatedly with one of his son's scrolls. That is why you listen to other people. Adam shielded his face from her whacks as Hermione and Ardith just watched on in amusement. Stubborn old man, moron, idiot, ass. I thought most wives were always respectful to the point of absurdity, Hermione whispered to Ardith. Mostly just in public, Ardith grinned. Or if the husband believes in beheading his wife for bad behavior. We don't believe in that in our tribe. Ardith held his hands up in defense as Hermione looked at him murderously. Are you bloody kidding me? Why don't we leave my parents to enjoy my father's newfound youth? Ardith said in a desperate plea to change the subject. We are not done talking about this, Hermione said in warning. She took out some vials and placed them on the table. When you are done, Hermione said loudly, catching her in-law's attention. Drink these tomorrow. We'll see you then and I'll check up on you. Thank you so much, Hermione. Basma rushed forward to give Hermione a hug. Why don't we meet for tea tomorrow? I would love to, Hermione said earnestly. Don't do anything strenuous until I clear you, Adam, Hermione said with a finger in Adam's direction. He looked about to protest when Basma raised the scroll again in warning. All right, all right. I waited for years. What's a few days more? Good, Hermione nodded and stepped through the magical door that led to their home in Cairo. She did not wait a second before letting her onslaught come forth as Ardith closed the door behind them. Beheading their wives, Ardith sighed. The cultural differences was one of the struggles he could have easily done without. When Hermione decided to do something, it was never half-assed. When Hermione decided to take over the medical care of the entire village, no one escaped. When she finally decided to take Ardith's advice and write a book to release her memories, Hermione had that book written within a month. Hermione made a magical garden with future endangered creatures, read books constantly, bartered with the goblins for the curse assistance within the tombs. Ardith had honestly not known what their life would become when he got married, but it was utterly amazing in ways he could never have dreamed up on his own. And when the O'Connells finally came for their promised visit, Ardith was delighted that Hermione had listened to his suggestion and handed over her book before Evelyn could start her crusade for information. Read. Then we talk. Alex. Hermione engulfed Alex in a hug along with Rick and Jonathan. Let's go to our home. I'm sure you will love the changes we have made. Rick, I know you will love our garden. Not much for gardening, Rick said with puzzlement. It's more what's living in my garden that I think will acquire the bulk of your attention, Hermione said with a twinkle in her eyes. It had not escaped her notice that Rick had spent several hours perusing the Monster Book of Monsters. Evelyn had commented on it many times in her letters because Rick had never spent any real time reading before he possessed the book. In all honesty, Hermione had mostly started developing the garden for their benefit, and also for Ardith. Hermione was hesitant to bring them to the magical world and had decided instead to bring the magical world to them, and the garden was becoming quite the garden indeed. Hermione's whooping willow was still a baby, but you could see the occasional mischievous pixie flying through the air. She was planning on inviting centaurs from endangered lands and making a safe area for a dragon rescue, but those would take time. Maybe once she had children to help her, Hermione would have those. Alex and Rick were delighted to encounter the chore of gnome throwing. Ardith had been baffled when Hermione had introduced him to it, but regularly did so every morning without question. As of yet, Hermione was still working on acquiring and rescuing and building, but it was a dream she hoped very much to attain. Alex was having the time of his life, politely bowing to Henry the ladder, climbing up, and then sliding down the stairs. Jonathan still hadn't convinced the ladder to let him up, and spent several minutes chasing it, before plopping with a tired sigh down on the couch, next to the reading Evelyn. Hermione was sipping her coffee and chatting peacefully with Rick on the creatures she hoped to save when Evelyn finally sat down next to her with a somber look and placed the book down in front of her. I don't know how you sleep at all, Evelyn said quietly. Writing the book helped tremendously. Ardith's idea, Hermione smiled wryly into her cup. Evelyn sighed and gripped Hermione in a tight hug. I am so sorry, Hermione. Hermione immediately hugged Evelyn back and just sat there. It was all so much better now. There is nothing to be sorry about. I wouldn't be here if it hadn't happened, and I wouldn't change that for the world. Chapter 27. Aunt Hermione, are you all right? Alex piped up. You do look quite green, Hermione. Evelyn looked at Hermione with concern. However, Hermione ignored them and stared at her eggs while willing herself not to vomit. It was so strange. She was never the type to get sick, but the last couple of days had been absolutely awful, and none of Hermione's potions were working. It made no sense. You were sick yesterday morning too, Rick added. Morning sickness, Jonathan said through a mouthful of eggs. Maybe the old girl is pregnant. Hermione's eyes widened, and she suddenly felt sick for an entirely different reason as she made a run for the bathroom. After she was done puking in the toilet, she checked. The results were irrefutable. Hermione laid down on the cold marble floor. A baby. She was going to have a baby. Why hadn't the thought of having a baby ever occurred to her? It should have, for obvious reasons. What is wrong? Ardith asked with trepidation as he entered his home to Evelyn's panicked knocking on the bathroom door and the rest of them tense and awkward. Well, Jonathan started. Don't you dare, Jonathan. Evelyn turned to point at Jonathan threateningly. You let Hermione do the talking. Ardith immediately rushed to the door and found it locked. He tried to force it open, but the blasted thing didn't budge. He knocked, and more frantically, until he demanded that Hermione let him in loudly and with threats to take the door off its hinges. Finally, the lock clicked open, but Hermione didn't exit. Ardith rushed in expecting the worst when he saw his wife lying on the ground with her cheek to the floor. Hermione, Ardith rushed to check on her, but Hermione held up a hand in a placating manner. I'm fine, Ardith, just queasy. Then you need a doctor, Ardith said with concern. I will need a doctor, Hermione agreed. But I am fairly certain they won't be of much use for a few months. She chuckled as she saw Ardith frowning in confusion. But I have a more important matter to discuss with you. What could be more important than making sure you are well? Ardith burst out with frustration. What are your views on children? Hermione said cryptically. Children, Ardith said blankly. Yes, Hermione smirked. Specifically our children, from my womb, in say 9 months, give or take a little. You all right? Ardith blinked, and his face broke out into the biggest smile Hermione had ever seen on him. We are having a baby. We are having a baby, Hermione chuckled. Why don't you go tell everyone the good news? I will, but you can't stay there, Ardith insisted. Let me take you to bed. No, Hermione growled. I am perfectly happy where I am. Go celebrate. I am going to continue enjoying the cold floor and will join you in a few hours. When he didn't move, Hermione shoved him awkwardly from her sprawled position. Just go. And send Evelyn in. Ardith finally listened and rushed to share the good news. Basma was glaring at a sheepishly grinning Adam when Ardith rushed in. Ardith stopped short at the odd atmosphere. In my defense, my love, Adam began. You have no defense, Basma raged. You are a moron. The tomb spells needed to be tested, Adam attempted to reason. They did not, Basma hissed. Hermione said as much, but you had to go behind both our backs and fulfill your curiosity. You are lucky that the goblin didn't leave you to die. No one would have known what happened to you if he had. Snaggletooth is perfectly trustworthy, Adam began. He actually is not, Father, Ardith finally cut in. Snaggletooth might have told us you were there eventually, and if you had been a wizard, he absolutely would have left you there. Goblins hate wizards and witches. Snaggletooth probably only thought twice about the matter because he knows Hermione would have put 2 and 2 together, and has a grudging respect for her money, if not for Hermione herself. Which tomb did you enter? Ardith completely forgot his news as he was regaled by his father's unusually rash behavior. The trap had been of Hermione's design. 1 minute you were walking down a tunnel deep underground, and the next you were pulled through the air by a wind tunnel that held you pinned to a grate at the surface. It appeared to be nothing more than a skylight, and it was impossible for anyone to see the danger. Hermione had been inspired by a book she had read as a child. Breathing through the winds would be difficult, and escaping on your own nearly impossible. Father had attracted the attention of a Medjai walking over the grate, and Medjai, in turn, demanded that Snaggletooth release him from the spell. Father had been more exhilarated than alarmed, and Ardith was rubbing a hand across his face. Might I suggest approaching Hermione before Snaggletooth next time? Ardith sighed. I suppose, Adam shrugged, but at least he agreed. Old fool, Basma huffed angrily. Having healed lungs is no excuse to act like you are 16 years old again. I think it is, Adam grinned, and I thought you had been enjoying me acting like I was 16 at least in the bedroom. Please, Ardith interrupted. Don't answer that, he begged his mother. As you wish, my son, Basma held back a laugh. How is Hermione doing? She was not feeling well when I tried to visit yesterday. She is still sick, Ardith suddenly smiled wide. But it is a good sickness. Hermione is pregnant. Oh, Allah, Basma squealed with excitement and pulled Ardith into a big hug. I had wondered when it would finally happen. I am already nearly finished with your baby's blanket, and I was worried we were going to have to wait forever. Congratulations, Ardith. Adam gripped Ardith in a hug next. Your mother really was getting worried. I was about to have a talk with you to make sure you were fulfilling your marital duties properly. Adam, Basma chastised. Well, Adam grinned mischievously. Can you blame me for worrying? There was that incident with the brothel. And pining for one woman for over 11 years doesn't lead to a good sexual education. Please, Father, don't hold back on my account, Ardith said dryly. Any thoughts on a mother's gift? Basma interrupted Adam's ribbing. Actually, Ardith smiled. I do, but it will take a little bit of work. Work, Adam frowned. Yes, Ardith grinned, but you have the body of a 16-year-old now. You should have no problem. Actually, I'm starting to feel 80 years old. My poor back, Adam said dramatically. I'll remember that tonight, Basma rolled her eyes. Let's not be hasty, Adam stood up ramrod straight. What will I need to do? Well, Ardith chuckled. It is tradition, Terence, Adam said with calm boredom as his brother banged around his study angrily. Tradition be damned. I'm not going to the witch's home to tell her she is having a baby. She will probably set that infernal book of hers on me, or the pixies. You cannot tell me you have forgotten the incident with the pixies. I have not forgotten, Adam smirked. Hermione introduced me to her magical camera just before the blessed event, and I can look at you screeching and running away from the Blue Devils any day I please. Would you like a copy? No, Terence should have known it was all futile. He stood in the decrepit alley, arguing with his brother about what good reading a piece of paper would do if they were supposedly already there despite all his protests. I swear, brother of mine, you're going to experience literal heart palpitations when you see the inside. Terence finally sighed and read the paper. When he looked up, Adam snickered at the slack-jawed expression on his face. I also did you a favor and selected the family gift for you to present to the mother-to-be. Terence finally looked away from the eye-boggling sight to take the black bag in his hand. Terence cursed as the bag moved as it was passed over. What the bloody hell is it? Well, Adam said as he walked up to the door, since you couldn't be bothered to help, you will have to find out when she opens it. Terence looked at the bag askance and held it a distance away from himself as his nephew opened the door. Father, you managed to drag Uncle here. I see you must have taken my suggestion for your gift. Ardith grinned at his uncle's clear disgruntlement with amusement. He doesn't know, Adam whispered. Well, if you followed my suggestions, Ardith whispered. He isn't going to like it any more when it is out of the bag. What in Allah's beard is in the bag, Ardith? Terence was promptly ignored. Please come in, Ardith said cheerily. Adam just pushed Terence through the door and shut it behind him when he stopped in amazement at the beautiful home within. You are also the first to know, Father. We are having a boy. Adam didn't even question his son, how he just immediately began hugging him joyfully. Marvelous, Terence set down the bag and tried to sit in a spindly chair in shock, but fell right on his ass when it walked right out from under him. Adam and Ardith drew Hermione's attention with their booming laughs. Howie! Terence couldn't even get anything out. As Hermione walked in, he was able to bolster up some of his usual attitude. Why would you bewitch a chair to move? Hermione smiled serenely and bowed politely to the chair that had escaped Terence and primly sat down in it. Well, partially because they were moving stairs at my magical school of Hogwarts. But I always loved and was intrigued by the stories of Beauty and the Beast with sentient candles and chairs and wardrobes. So I made the majority of the furniture sentient. I am very pleased with the results. If you don't bow to Josby, he doesn't really feel inclined to let you sit on him. The couch is an earlier acquisition, so not bewitched if you would like assurance that it will not try to escape you. Terence got up and approached the couch with trepidation. He poked it and jumped back, and all the furniture creaked in amusement. Terence sagged with relief when he sat down, and the couch didn't do anything unusual. We have brought you a congratulatory gift, Adam said with ill-concealed amusement as he picked up the fallen bag. Hermione cocked her head curiously as it moved in her hands. I sure as hell hope you didn't stuff a falcon in here. It will be pissed when it comes out. Hermione immediately began talking sweetly to the battered and irate orange cat that popped out of the bag. Oh, sweetie, it was hell catching that thing, let me tell you, Adam said. Ardith said you appreciate the more difficult strays and would prefer an orange cat if I could manage it. Hermione gave Ardith a look as he grinned. Very funny, Ardith. I suppose the cat's name must be Ronald now, mustn't it? Thank you, Father. Thank you, Uncle. I'm sure Harry will appreciate a companion. Ardith was not at all surprised when Hermione completely ignored the rest of them and immediately began treating the wild cat and washing him and feeding him treats. Was it really that difficult to catch him? Ardith said curiously. I had to dive on top of him with the bag. Terence got up curiously and poked the stair. It doesn't move, does it? Terence asked his nephew suspiciously. No, Ardith smiled innocently. It doesn't move. It wasn't long before Terence was screeching with alarm as he slid head first down the slide. You said it didn't move, Terence accused as he wiped down his robes and glared viciously at his nephew. It doesn't, Ardith argued. It just turns into a slide if anyone male tries to walk up it. There is a ladder over there. Terence grumbled and approached the ladder only to screech as it moved out from under his hand. You must ask Henry politely if you wish to go up him. Screw this witch's tomfoolery. Stop trying to pacify me. I'm just trying to help you calm down, Ardith said to Hermione soothingly. Well, quit it, Hermione growled. Knock, knock. Rick froze at the feeling of hostility through the air. So how's the pregnancy going? Just peachy, Hermione spat out. I'll just send Evelyn in, Rick said before turning tail and running. You are scaring our friends, Hermione, Ardith sighed. Ardith immediately regretted it when Hermione looked at him like she wanted nothing more than to eviscerate him. Do you want snacks? Ardith said hopefully, and was relieved when Hermione brightened. Chocolate and dried fish, Hermione smiled. Whatever you wish, my love. What would you like to drink? Camel milk. I'll get it right away. Ardith went to the kitchen and immediately shook his head at the bizarre mix of ingredients. Are those what the old girl is craving? Jonathan said from where he was sipping fire whiskey. Not a word from you, Ardith threatened. The way Hermione is now could have been the only thing we needed to defeat the Scorpion King and all 3 waves of the Anubis army. Is that our tea? Evelyn called out as she walked in with Rick and Alex through the front door and raised her eyebrows. Pregnancy cravings, Evelyn questioned with a chuckle. Is there tea also? I'll make it. Go visit the pregnant woman and bring this as offering, Ardith said dryly. She is pregnant, not a goddess you are making sacrifices to, Evelyn snorted, but took the tray anyway. That's because she didn't see the look Hermione gave me. I thought fire was going to shoot from her eyes, Rick whispered as he sat down and grabbed a glass of fire whiskey. Was Mum like that when she was pregnant with me? Alex said curiously. Nope. She just kept on doing insanely dangerous things, Rick said with a tired sigh. Going on digs, stocking books on the ladder in the library, and heaven forbid you try to stop her. Prepare to be whacked senseless in that case. My romp has never felt the same, Jonathan said seriously. Ardith finished preparing the tea and made his way to the bedroom. May Allah get him through this alive. When the fateful day arrived, Hermione was left feeling completely shocked. Being fully pregnant was hardly a pleasure. Sleeping comfortably was impossible. She was constantly irritable. Hermione couldn't wait for it all to be over. And then it was over so fast her head was spinning with the ferocity of the event. Hermione was lying in bed feeling decidedly strange. She called out to Ardith and started hobbling awkwardly toward the staircase. Hermione wasn't in too much pain, but the only way she could walk was in a weird squatting position. She felt the liquid going down her legs. Hermione was clearly in labor, but then Ardith reached the top of the ladder, and all the plans he had been concocting for Hermione's eventual childbirth were thrown out the window. Because there was a decidedly head-shaped bulge in Hermione's sweat pants. Ardith rushed forward, pulled down her pants, and only narrowly caught the baby in his hands. He was shocked. Hermione was shocked. And Evelyn, who had run from the guest room carrying Hermione's bag to take with them to the Medjai, also stopped to stare in shock. It was a comical sight. Ardith grasping his now crying son, still attached to his barely standing wife, with an umbilical cord. Hermione's mouth gaping in disbelief. Ardith, I don't think we are going to make it to the hospital, Hermione finally joked dryly. Would you mind sending Horace to request a home visit? I'll go get him. Evelyn finally burst back into action, dropped the luggage, and ran to Horace's perch in the kitchen. I was all prepared for you to turn the bones in my hand to dust while you screamed obscenities during labor, Ardith chuckled. I could still arrange that, Hermione glared playfully. Well, you could always wait to see if we have another child. Something to look forward to, Ardith said carefully. I think that could be arranged, but not for several years, Hermione smiled. Ardith grinned. He passed Hermione their son as she sat down against the wall and took Horace from Evelyn as she ran up the stairs. I can't believe you already had your baby. Evelyn brought blankets to Hermione. I wish my labor had been so easy. Well, it was my turn to have something go my way, Hermione chuckled, and there is still the afterbirth to get through. Afterbirth? Ardith asked with confusion. You are happier not knowing, Evelyn said, and even happier not doing it, Hermione grumbled. I am so happy, Hababai. Ardith stooped to kiss Hermione. I will be back with a Mediwitch as soon as possible. Don't disappear for 11 years while I'm gone. I just gave birth, she scoffed. I'm hardly in a position to disappear. Don't run away screaming from any prostitutes while you're gone, Hermione retorted. There was no screaming, Ardith said with an exasperated sigh. Are you sure? Hermione raised an eyebrow. Because I remember screaming. Absolutely no screaming. Agree to disagree, and for the record, little Artemis here agrees with me, Hermione said with a sly grin. He can't talk, Ardith Mark glared. How can you even know he agrees with you? A mother knows, Hermione said mystically. Already using the mother card, Ardith said dramatically. How fast things change. Just go send the message so you can come back and cut the cord, Hermione ordered. Yes, ma'am, Ardith chuckled.